First up is Wolverine vs. the Hulk. Talk about making an entrance. The Canadian superhero burst onto the scene on his home turf in issue 181 of the Incredible Hulk comic books. Wolverine was working for the Canadian federal government at the time and ended up having to jump into a fight between Hulk and the Wendigo. This was truly a clash of the titans, and the Wolverine proved to the world that he could hold his own. He ended up taking on both characters before he eventually sided with Hulk, and the pair worked together to take down Wendigo. It's nothing new for Marvel heroes to fight each other when they first meet, but this one hit a little heavier than usual. There was quite a bit of tension between Wolverine and Hulk for a very long time. There's always the feeling that neither one of them actually got over it. Whatever the case though, it was still the perfect way for Wolverine to announce his arrival and put the Hulk on notice. Up next, Wolverine tosses Deadpool. Well, we already know these two have had some wild rides together. The relationship between Wolverine and Deadpool can simply be described as complicated. Although they have fought alongside each other on numerous occasions, they've also had plenty of situations that have turned sour. Back in 2009's Hulk vs. Wolverine, the Canadian government tasked their hero with tracking down the Green Giant. The only problem was that Team X, which included Wolverine's old buddy Deadpool, managed to capture him. Although Deadpool had his usual basket of witty insults prepared, Wolverine got the last laugh when he tossed the foul-mouthed hero into a revived Hulk. To add even more insult to injury, the Green Giant then smashed Deadpool into a wall. It might not have been an electric fight on this occasion, but Wolverine definitely got the last laugh. Next up is Wolverine vs. Captain America. These two have had an up and down relationship over the years, but things really got interesting in the third issue of Avengers vs. X-Men. It's obvious that the two sides had very different opinions on certain topics, and this boiled over into a hard-fought battle over the Phoenix Force. Wolverine had informed the Avengers that Cyclops did not have good intentions for the Phoenix Force and was ready to kickstart the war. Captain America, however, was not buying what Wolverine was selling and began to have doubts about the X-Men. The two heroes eventually came to blows, and Wolverine actually did much better than most people might have assumed. He was really giving Captain America a run for his money until Giant Man stepped in and hammered Wolverine from behind. Wolverine might have lost this one, but it was only because Captain America needed some outside help to win. After that, we have Wolverine vs. Spider-Man. If you want to talk about epic showdowns, then this one is definitely near the top of the list. Wolverine and Spider-Man were both placed in Berlin during the Cold War for two very different reasons. Spider-Man was on assignment as a photographer, but Wolverine was actually trying to help a spy who also happened to be an ex-girlfriend of his. The spy wanted Wolverine to put her out of her misery, as the Germans and the Soviets were both on her tail, but Spider-Man did not want this to happen. He wanted to bring the elusive spy to justice, and this ultimately meant that he would have to fight Wolverine. The two had a spirited tilt, and although Wolverine didn't come out with W on this occasion, his tremendous skills ultimately got him exactly what he wanted. Spider-Man's rage had risen to new levels, and he'd ended up striking the spy with a lethal punch, which of course is what Wolverine set out to do in the first place. Up next is Wolverine vs. North Star. Enemy of the State was a pretty wild time in the life of Wolverine. This story saw the Canadian hero lured to Japan, where he was eliminated by Gorgon, only to be resurrected as a powerful slave of an evil ninja syndicate. He then worked as a soldier for the Hand and Hydra Alliance and attacked pretty much everyone in sight. Enemy of the State includes some memorable battles with Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, and many more. But Wolverine's biggest statement from all of these fights was his battle against his fellow Canadian, North Star. Wolverine came out of this fight as the only surviving hero, but his crazed rampage was finally put to a stop by the rest of the X-Men. Who knows how many more he could have taken down had the X-Men not intercepted him. Our next fight takes us back to Wolverine vs. Deadpool. On this occasion, Wolverine actually managed to take his acquaintance's head off with his razor-sharp claws. This all occurred in the 44th issue of Cable and Deadpool, when the foul-mouthed hero went solo to try and save Weasel from Hydra. This unfortunately meant that he was going to cross paths with Wolverine, who had been tasked with taking out the Hydra base's section commander. Of course, that commander happens to be Weasel, and the conflicting jobs ended up resulting in another fight between the two heroes. Unfortunately for Deadpool, Wolverine took a quick swipe at his frenemy's head and managed to clear it right off of his shoulders. While this would have been the end of pretty much anyone, Deadpool's special abilities only called for his head to be stuck back on his neck so he could return to normal. Next on our list is Wolverine vs. Cyclops. This was a spirited tilt that included many years of built-up rage. Now, to say things have been rocky between these two heroes over the years would be the ultimate understatement. It's no secret that Wolverine and Cyclops never saw eye to eye on many things, but it rarely ever boiled over into violence. That is until Cyclops decided to send a young mutant to eliminate a group of Hellfire Club goons. This decision sent Wolverine over the edge, as he couldn't understand why Cyclops would send such a young person to commit this terrible crime. The two exchanged verbal jabs before they finally let their fists do the talking and kicked off one of the craziest fights we've ever seen. A Sentinel eventually showed up to put a stop to this rage-filled battle, so there really was no definitive winner. The intense fight did, however, remind everyone everybody that Wolverine meant business. Now we have Demon Wolverine versus the X-Men. The Canadian superhero was dragged into hell on multiple occasions, but his demon-possessed fight against his X-Men buddies was one for the ages. The Red Right Hand summoned Logan to the underworld and Logan goes to hell, only for his body to be completely taken over by a demonic entity. This demon was hell-bent, pun intended, on tracking down the rest of the X-Men and eliminating them with one of their own allies. While the real Wolverine was doing his best to escape from the underworld, his possessed body took on the X-Men in a battle for the ages. Although it wasn't technically Wolverine himself, this is still one of the hero's most memorable fights. The demon made good use of the body while it was in control, and showed off the tremendous power that Wolverine is actually capable of. Now thankfully the X-Men managed to put a stop to their evil friend, but this was one battle that we will never forget. Up next is the Deadpool fight from Wolverine Origins. There is absolutely no shortage of conflicts between these guys who always seem to be brought together by fate. While Deadpool was on a mission to eliminate his old pal Wolverine, turns out there was an unexpected twist that led him to this situation. Deadpool was hilariously using all sorts of cartoon attack methods to eliminate Wolverine, such as dropping a piano on his head, but nothing seemed to work. After many tense battles and verbal tirades, the two heroes eventually got serious and discovered a little more about why they were in this situation. As it turns out, Wolverine was actually the one who hired Deadpool in the first place to eliminate himself. He did this to lure Daken out of hiding. This of course meant that Wolverine was able to use Deadpool to get the last laugh and ensure that he got exactly what he wanted. It also must have stung Deadpool pretty bad that he was unable to complete his task of eliminating Wolverine. And finally we have Wolverine versus the Grey Hulk. Logan came to blows with his longtime enemy once again for one of the most memorable fights in Marvel's history. In issue 340 of The Incredible Hulk, Wolverine decides to take matters into his own hands while Grey Hulk is on a rampage. He jumps into another battle with the Raging Giant to put an end to the Smash Fest, and both heroes really gave it everything they had. There was plenty of back and forth and lots of destruction, and Wolverine actually managed to push Grey Hulk to the brink. It probably would have been over against almost any other hero, but Hulk's healing abilities allowed him to make a comeback and get the final decision in this fight. Although Wolverine might have lost in the end, he was able to taste a bit of victory against one of his toughest opponents. This also put the Hulk on notice that his enemy was stronger than he might have originally thought.
Number 10. Kills. One of the worst things about Wolverine in general, but also maybe one of the best things, is that he kills. Or more now that he's willing to kill, I guess. Although back in the day, he really did kill pretty indiscriminately. And like I said, it was basically what made him one of the worst, while also being the best at what he does. Although as Wolverine has even said himself, what he does isn't usually very nice. Now Wolverine is more reserved to maiming those he comes up against, only really killing those who he feels really deserve it, who are beyond redemption. But even then, the fact that Wolverine thinks he gets to decide those folks' fate could be seen as, well, pretty problematic. I mean, Wolverine's a pretty good dude all around, but I still don't think, even as a hero, that he should get the judgment call on who lives and who dies. You know what I mean? It definitely makes him a way more complex and interesting character. I will say that, so it is good in that way. Number 9. Almost killed an innocent. During his first long-running Wolverine series, Wolverine at one point must face off against Lady Deathstrike. The first time around that this happens in the series is back in the past, after Wolverine has seemingly traveled back in time via a picture. It makes a lot more sense if you read the story, but it's basically what happens. While attempting to escape Lady Deathstrike and defeat the German World War II soldiers who have infiltrated the part of Spain Wolverine is in, he and the rebels are faced with the decision of what to do with a young prisoner who has seen too much and could cause them to be captured if he's forced to talk. Prisoner's name is Jamie, by the way. I didn't write that down, but I know that, just in case you're wondering. One of the options on the table is to simply take out the prisoner Jamie, but because of his age, Wolverine ultimately helps to let the boy go and set him free. However, for a small moment there, it is implied that Wolverine has basically made the other choice and decided to kill the prisoner rather than let him walk free, with a promise that he won't tell anyone what he has seen or heard about where the rebels are headed. It's a very shocking moment where you're like, wait, did that just happen? Don't worry, it didn't happen. Oh, it only almost happened. The notion was entertained, and that I think is still pretty bad. Number 8. Relationship with Squirrel Girl. Wolverine's relationship with Squirrel Girl, as was established in New Avengers, might be considered by some to be one of the worst things he's ever done, or that was ever done to him as a character, I guess. This is likely because Squirrel Girl, aka Doreen Green, is often depicted as being from a different generation entirely than Wolverine, and that's not even considering that he's actually even older than he appears, and then the generation that he first appeared in. Squirrel Girl and Wolverine were implied to have had a romantic relationship in the 2010 New Avengers series in issue number 7, and many consider it to be pretty odd. And I gotta say, the way it's also kind of weirdly like shoehorned in there, you're like, what? Why is this in here? What purpose narratively does this really give us? And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about Wolverine, then be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Goodness knows he's done a lot of bad things. Even Wolverine would say that though. He'd be like, I got a lot of things in my closet. I got a lot of skeletons in my closet, bub. Number 7. Killed Jean Grey. Wolverine has done this on multiple occasions, and in one instance, kinda killed Jean on repeat, stuck on a loop of death after she refused to stay dead thanks to the resurrection powers of the Phoenix Force. Initially, Wolverine killed Jean out of mercy to save her from a gruesome death, burning up as they were in a space shuttle that was rapidly getting closer and closer to the sun. However, this death was actually quite helpful, as it allowed Jean to at least regenerate, unlocking her full potential as the Phoenix, which meant that she could actually then save them, so yay! And surprisingly, she also wasn't even mad about Wolverine killing her. Bonus! I'd be pretty mad, to be honest. I'd be like, wow, you just killed me. That's pretty shady, man. But I guess when you're like, but you unlocked my full potential, it's like, well, alright. Shortly thereafter, Jean would be killed permanently by Magneto, but years later would return again, only to have Wolverine, afraid of the potential of Dark Phoenix, along with the rest of the X-Men, kill her on repeat for a while by stabbing her through with his claws until he realized this wasn't exactly having the same effect that he'd hoped, as the Phoenix Force basically just kept rezzing Jean, so doesn't always work out. Still, that's a lot of Jean deaths. That is, I think, at least 9 Jean deaths total. I think 8 stabbies the one time, 1 stabby the other time. A lot of deaths. A lot of deaths without any actual death, actually, now that I think about it. Number 6. Got even with the Punisher. So the Punisher has done some pretty heinous things to Wolverine over the years in their ongoing fight for who can be the most edgy. This has less to do with Wolverine and Punisher feuding within the comics, and more to do with shots being fired between a few of their passionate writers, Wolverine's Frank Thierry and Punisher's Garth Ennis. Now granted, Thierry has also written a few Punisher titles in his time, although I don't think Ennis has ever written a Wolverine titled book, at least not as far as I know, which is surprising to me. But anyways, I digress. In Thierry's 2003 issue of Wolverine, issue 186, Thierry ended up aiming to get revenge on the Punisher for what Garth Ennis had him do in 2002 during his Marvel Knights run on Punisher in issue number 17. Ennis had Punisher brutally attack and maim Wolverine, basically, even going so far as to steamroll him, and some other things, which I don't know if I can even say on YouTube, but they were bad. To get revenge, Thierry had Wolverine imply the Punisher was gay. Doesn't sound so bad until you read it and you see how it's presented, with Logan implying the Punisher is basically lesser or less of a man or a hero because of his possible sexual orientation. Yikes. Maybe don't do that. Maybe don't write that. It's unfortunate because now that's also on Wolverine as a character. Eek. Number 5. Actually killed innocents. Other than Jamie, who Wolverine seemingly almost had killed but then ultimately did not have killed, and the countless other baddies that Wolverine has faced and defeated over the years, there are also other youngsters that Wolverine has been forced to take down. One of the worst moments where Wolverine has been forced to eliminate a youth happens actually outside of the main continuity in the Ultimate Universe, the reality of Earth 1610. Here, Wolverine is sent on a mission to do the X-Men's dirty work by taking out a young mutant who threatens the very rights mutants are basically fighting for. The sad part, really isn't this kid's fault. His mutant power simply manifested without him knowing and caused him to accidentally vaporize the entire residents of his town, including seemingly his high school crush or his girlfriend or sweetheart and his parents. So really feels pretty bad, and you're like, wow, Wolverine, really, wow, that's what you're doing? But he's like, hey, I gotta protect the mutants or something by killing a mutant or something. Seems a little shady, the reasoning there. Number 4. Became Apocalypse. Of course, this one also did not happen in the main continuity, but hey, it still happened, so it still counts. This all went down in Age of Apocalypse, where Wolverine, here known as Weapon X, would fight against Apocalypse for most of his life. At one point, he was part of Magneto's X-Men, but would leave them to rescue Jean Grey, his love, and later his wife, and fight alongside her against Apocalypse in their own way. Eventually, however, Jean was believed to have been killed and Weapon X would become a recluse, only to find out years later that she was actually alive. Dun dun dun. When the Celestials returned to Earth following the death of Apocalypse, James Howlett offered himself to the Celestials in order to prevent the destruction of Earth. However, this caused him to become the very villain he had hated the most, as the Celestials used tech to modify him, giving him great power but basically warping his mind, and causing him to become Apocalypse's heir, known as Weapon Omega. He was basically just like, evolution is what it's all about, baby. People were like, but don't you see? You're Apocalypse now. And he's like, but it's different. I'm trying to save people by killing people. Wait a minute, maybe you're right. Number 3, killed the mongrels. These last few spots are definitely all competitors for the number 1 spot on this list in my opinion. This one is especially bad because the mongrels were actually Wolverine's children, although he didn't know it at the time that he was forced to fight them. They were rounded up by his known son with Itsu, Daken. Daken was working with the Red Right Hand, a group who had a personal vendetta against Wolverine. Daken created the team known as the Mongrels, not even really to defeat Wolverine, despite Daken having trained them himself. It was kinda like a win-win situation for him. Either Wolverine would be killed by the children he didn't know or had forgotten he'd sired over the years, or Wolverine would end up killing them all. The latter was kinda how it went down, and when Wolverine learned that the members of the Mongrels had actually all been his children, and he didn't know that, he was pretty heartbroken. So I guess point 1 for Red Right Hand and Daken. Only sad points for Wolverine. No points for the Mongrels because they died. Number 2, made moves on MJ. So this one is so awful, it of course cannot come from the main canon of Earth 616. Instead, this point comes to us from the alternate reality of Earth 1610, also known as the Ultimate Universe. After Wolverine had she attempted to get back at him by making him telepathically swap bodies with the person he hated the most, which ended up being Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. Although Jean later says, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know this would happen to you, Peter. Oops." But anyways, while swapped, both heroes struggle to deal with the everyday while occupying each other's bodies. However, Wolverine still manages to find some time to put some moves on MJ. Well, they don't seal the deal. This is really messed up because Mary Jane at this point in time is a teenager, and she didn't even know that Peter and Logan had swapped bodies, so she thought that it was just Peter looking for some action instead of the super old at this point thanks to his healing factor, X-Men hero Wolverine. Although not a very heroic moment here, Wolverine. What you doing? Don't do that. Number 1, kill Daken. I think one of the worst things you can do as a parent is to kill those you're supposed to be looking out for and taking care of and protecting, even if your son happens to be the often villainous Daken, now commonly referred to by his actual birth/human name, Akihiro. At one point, Wolverine was forced to put down Akihiro during a fight. Akihiro had held a grudge against his old man for years, having been trained by Romulus to hate Logan after being stolen from his mother's womb and raised by Romulus. For years, Wolverine thought his son was dead, not knowing to come searching for Akihiro. But Akihiro was raised to believe he was basically abandoned, and he also grew up in a household where people didn't like him because he was half Japanese and half Canadian, so that was another issue. Thanks to some plotting from the devious and diabolical mind of Victor Creed, aka Wolverine's nemesis Sabretooth, Wolverine was forced into a death match with Daken, a match that ended with Wolverine killing Akihiro, drowning him in a puddle, while sadly thinking of what could have been had Akihiro been given a chance at a semi-normal life, being raised by Wolverine and of course his now deceased mother Itsu. What would it have been like if their life had been happy? We'll never know because he gets drowned in a puddle. But don't worry, Akihiro's alive and well now, so it all fixed itself. And now he and Wolverine are on great terms, so never mind, I guess.
The Silver Samurai is a bit more of a complex figure. I wouldn't necessarily call him an outright superhero, so let's just get that out of the way. But he has genuinely acted as a superhero on multiple occasions. When Wolverine was training in order to use the Muramasa blade, he went to the Silver Samurai for that training. While the samurai had trained Logan at a disadvantage, meaning he gave Logan only half of a wooden sword while he had 2, after about 5 days, Logan had gained enough skill to not only defeat Silver Samurai, but he even had 6 different ways that he could have done it and chose the least painful of the 6 different ways Samurai had left himself open to, as to not hurt the man's pride too much. He held back on Silver Samurai and tried not to humble him too much, so that's why at this point we'll stay up here near the top of the list. But coming in next, Wolverine and Cyclops are not really the greatest of friends, even if they are now technically part of a throuple. I'm not getting into that. But while there are moments where Wolverine has physically humbled the leader of the X-Men, this next spot was more of a fun little jab at Cyclops' sense of style. When the two of them have to fight all of the Sentinels in Wolverine and the X-Men number 40, there's some tension as to whether Logan is just gonna bail out and let Cyclops handle the robots all by his lonesome. Now, he doesn't do that, and the two heroes destroy every single Sentinel around. After they're limping out of the place, Wolverine mentions how they look like hell, and Cyclops fires back saying, "You always look like hell," which is when Wolverine says the man who wears sunglasses indoors. It's honestly a pretty wholesome, kinda cute, funny moment, but even then, Wolverine is still dissing Cyclops just a little bit. This next humbling comes to us in Wolverine and the X-Men number 12, written by Jason Aaron. Starring Rachel Gray,
she's charged with attempting to hunt down Wolverine and Hope Summers after the duo escaped at the end of the previous issue. She tracks Wolverine and the other Avengers on the run, including Giant Man, Spider-Woman, Thor, War Machine, Captain America, Quicksilver, and Beast. Now, a battle eventually ensues as Rachel reveals her crew: Kid Gladiator, Iceman, Angel, and Namor. Now, Kid Gladiator is the one here who gets humbled, and it was kind of a long time coming as the kid was a little too cocky for his own good. After giving Wolverine a pretty ruthless beatdown, admittedly, and, quote, commanding Wolverine to pop his claws, Wolverine pops up, and in one move he explains how he's studied to be able to bring down anything that lives, including superpowered Strontians like Kid Gladiator, using a single pressure point to subdue the kid before telling him he should have stayed in school, kid. James Howlett and Eddie Brock have a lot in common. Both have bonded with the Clintar symbiote known as Venom. Both are incredibly popular anti-heroes known for brutal tactics when dispatching evil. Wolverine and Venom have also crossed paths and have fought on more than one occasion. The Claws and Webs story, Venom Tooth and Claw, and Wolverine Exit Wounds #1. However, I'm going to talk about 2018's Venom Annual #1. Venom and Wolverine get into a bar fight pretty early on in Venom's career as a villain. Now, this fight takes place after Claw and Web, since Wolverine does remember fighting Venom before. Venom barges into the bar looking for Spider-Man, but Wolverine gives him a pretty hard time. The two fight, with Venom keeping Wolverine at bay and Wolverine continuously just charging at him over and over. Venom technically does deal more physical damage to Wolverine here, but Logan manages to break Venom down by shrugging off everything he did to him and always coming back, dismissing Venom's grudge against Spider-Man as childish and absurd, which leaves Venom humiliated as he just wanders off. Now, in what is a pretty inconsequential moment coming to us in New Avengers #15 from 2010, the Avengers are outside of Avengers Mansion doing a little sparring session, and the two we start off with are Iron Fist and, of course, Wolverine. The other Avengers watch on as these two engage in a battle of fisticuffs, not using their powers. They seem to be pretty well matched though, both blocking, dodging, and landing attacks on each other. Now, Iron Fist is obviously a martial arts based hero, and it would be easy to think that he has the upper hand in this conflict. But Wolverine is arguably one of the best hand-to-hand fighters in Marvel Comics. After Wolverine gets Iron Fist in a hold, Rand moves out of it, and before he can make his next move, Wolverine socks him with a punch that has him hitting the ground. Now, Wolverine says that he was fighting at about a 6 just then, while Iron Fist says that he was at a 3, but I don't know, man. That's pretty embarrassing. Then, Squirrel Girl just outmatches Wolverine with no problem, so things are a little wonky here anyways. Next up, the Thing is one of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, able to stand toe-to-toe with the Hulk in battle. He and Wolverine have had their scrapes, and most of the time Logan's been on the losing side of things. But in one altercation taking place in Fantastic Four 1961 issue 374, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, Professor Hulk, and Spider-Man, who had previously taken the place of the Fantastic Four, were hunting for Johnny Storm, who had accidentally just destroyed part of Empire State University. This led to an altercation between the four heroes and the actual Fantastic Four. When Wolverine went to attack Susan Storm, Ben Grimm grabbed the Canadian and slammed him into the ground, calling him an arrogant little creep. But Wolverine, in his rage, used all his might and slashed Ben across the face, disfiguring the Thing in a way that actually severely affected the character. The character even went on to wear a face mask for a chunk of time to hide his wounds. Wolverine is a Canadian, and as such, he is pretty closely tied to the Canadian superhero team Alpha Flight. In Uncanny X-Men 1963 number 355, Alpha Flight had been misled to attack Wolverine by Department H, and even though this is just solo Wolverine with no adamantium, he manages to make them look like a bunch of chumps. Starting off the fight, he knocks down Guardian and is seemingly taking on the entire team at once, with Puck jumping on his back and catching some swift elbows before being thrown off. He then faces Flex, who he simply just punches the lights out of, and when the fight finally begins to settle into some more peaceful talks, Wolverine gets sucker punched by Sasquatch, a gamma-powered Goliath, I'll remind you, who Wolverine then goes charging into, starting a fist fight, which is promptly interrupted by the arrival of the X-Men. Now, while Wolverine in the comics is very much a badass, he can sometimes find himself being a little silly and being outsmarted or outmoved by others from time to time. But I gotta say, his live-action counterpart, played iconically by Hugh Jackman, is a pretty consistent badass who puts almost everyone in their place. Now, this is a very small moment, but my god, god is it iconic. So this is the first X-Men movie. Wolverine is just suited up for the very first time and is joining the X-Men on a mission to rescue Rogue from the Statue of Liberty. It's the lead up to the movie's climax. The team enters into the statue, but because his entire skeleton is covered in adamantium, Wolverine sets off the metal detectors, which he then destroys with a quick slashy slash. Now Cyclops, being all mature and wannabe father figure like, gives Wolverine a stern old look of disapproval, to which Wolverine responds by retracting all but his middle claw. He gave Cyclops the Wolverine middle finger. Kids everywhere lost their damn minds. Sure, it's not one of the most clever moves, but god, I loved it. Wolverine was introduced in Incredible Hulk Volume 1, number 180 and 181 as an antagonist deployed by Canada's Department H to fight the Incredible Hulk, and thus a rivalry was born. One of the best fights the two have had comes from Savage Wolverine number 5, featuring Wolverine teaming up with Amadeus Cho and Shauna the She-Devil to prevent the destruction of a machine in the Savage Land. However, the monster this machine is meant to hold back is a pretty dastardly devil, and has been luring people to destroy the machine for it. After failing to do this to Wolverine, the monster instead turns its sights on the Hulk. The Hulk comes to the Savage Land and begins going wild, destroying everything in his path on his way to the machine. Now naturally, Wolverine alongside his companions stands in the Hulk's way, leading to a fight. But in a surprise move, not really seeing another option, Wolverine leaps onto the Hulk at the last second and runs his claws straight into his skull, lobotomizing him. This is still the Hulk we're talking about here, so he does regenerate pretty quickly, but this is an incredible feat for even Wolverine. And lastly, I'm coming back with another live action Wolverine moment because 1, I couldn't help myself, and 2, it's absolutely iconic. Now there are so many moments from the many movies to choose from, but I think one of my absolute favorites comes from X-Men First Class, when Wolverine shows up for less than 30 seconds. Every PG-13 movie gets one F-bomb, and this movie used it perfectly. During a recruitment montage during the 1960s, Professor X and Magneto are traveling around recruiting various mutants to their team when they find one James Howlett enjoying a cigar in a bar. They walk up, and just as they get their names out, James here barely acknowledges them as he says, "Go F yourself," and continues on with his cigar. It's beautiful.
Number 10, Deadpool has a breakthrough. A breakthrough. Get it? You will. There have been a few times that Wolverine has shamed and embarrassed Deadpool, especially in combat. One such time, Deadpool was actually the one looking for a fight, and so Wolverine decided to oblige him. But he didn't just do that, he also gave him some pretty witty retorts as well. You see, Deadpool was made to believe that fighting Wolverine would help resolve some issues he has with his own past. And while Wolverine not only schooled him in combat, but also wisdom, at one point Deadpool asks Logan to dig deeper. Not knowing at the time what Wade is talking about at all, Wolverine responds with that deep enough murk as he stabs him through with his claws. Wolverine has always had some of the best mid-combat speeches and retorts. He also might have the mutant power of being able to leap and give you a whole speech during that one leap. Number 9. Namor gets beat in his own domain. Surprisingly, Wolverine has seemingly held his own against Namor more than once in the comics. One such time was when the two duked it out in Civil War. Their fight goes down in Wolverine's tie-in issues, mainly being featured in issue 45. Here, not only does Wolverine prove himself on land, but also in the sea, breaking into Atlantis and Namor's palace, and even managing to hold his own in combat against Namor's guards, fighting underwater. And Wolverine isn't usually the best at fighting underwater. He has an underwater suit of Iron Man's to aid him, but it doesn't seem to operate very smoothly for him. Despite this, he gets a few good hits in at Namor, punching him back for a joke that he made when he thought Wolverine was Iron Man about keeping Wolverine on a tighter leash. Yikes. In the end, Wolverine also proves himself to Namor, and despite their disagreement over who should get custody of the criminal Nitro, Namor meets him later at a bar to give Wolverine the information that he was looking for, which I think is pretty nice. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more embarrassing moments that Wolverine has doled out, be sure to head on over to Facebook and click that like, because we are going to be putting up more content over there, and there'll be lots of good stuff for you in regards to Wolverine and other heroes. Number 8. Emma Frost's dirty secrets revealed. Dirty, dirty secrets. Actually, it's not that dirty. It's not that dirty of a secret in my mind, but you know. In this moment, it appeared to be, I guess, kinda dirty. During the first Civil War, Wolverine sets out on his own mission to capture Nitro, the one behind the start of the Civil War. Basically, the catalyst, if you will. He does this against the wishes of Cyclops and Emma Frost. When Emma and Cyke confront him about it in the 2003 Wolverine series in issue 46, the issue following the one with Namor, Emma threatens to basically mind wipe him back to a 3-year-old mental capacity. Wolverine responds by putting Emma in her place by 1, reminding her that the psi shields Professor X gave him protects him against her powers, and 2, by revealing that he knows she and Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, used to, team up. Well, Emma seems pretty shocked that Wolverine knows about this and is pretty embarrassed that he outed this previous relationship of hers to Scott. Her reaction is also interesting, as it's also during Civil War I, I believe, that she discloses that Scott does know of their relationship, of her relationship with Tony in the past, in a different comic. Although, maybe this happened after that, but I do believe the issue where Emma brings it up is Civil War issue number 3, and I think that was released before this issue. But maybe the continuity in canon is different than the release order, or I just found a continuity error, and that's what that is. Number 7. Is Hulk really the strongest there is? Yes, he still is, I think. He is the strongest there is. But he's not always the smartest, as is proven here in this fight against Wolverine from Incredible Hulk issue 340. Now, it should be noted that in this fight, Wolverine is actually taking on the Grey Hulk, which isn't known for being one of the strongest personas or versions of the Hulk. But still, the impressive part here isn't so much even Wolverine's skill and strength as a fighter, although you're likely to be impressed by that somewhat still if you're so inclined, but the smarts and character development we see Wolverine display here. Wolverine accidentally picks a fight with Hulk by insulting him, unintentionally. Hulk responds by attempting to attack Wolverine, who manages to get the first slash and kind of dodge in successfully, but then decides to take the higher road and actually chooses to apologize to the Hulk, not wanting to fight him and attempting to fight against his own internal animalistic desire and instincts to do so. When Hulk refuses to let him go and says, "I've gotten smarter and you've gotten gutless," Wolverine replied with, "Knowing when to fight and when to walk away is more smarts than you'll ever have." Yeah, I like that. Such a good Wolverine line to Hulk. Like, I'm just like, whoo! Ouch, you're gonna need some ice for that burn, Hulk. Number 6. Cable and Bishop both get bested. I can't even believe that this happened. Cable is considered an Omega level mutant, and yet Wolverine was still able to take him down. And for reference, Wolverine is considered beta level when it comes to his abilities and his control over them more specifically. At least, I think he's still considered beta level. He's definitely not Omega level, I'll tell you that much. Granted, Wolverine did have some help here from Bishop, and does at least choose to spare Cable during their fight as part of the Executioner song story. You see, he thinks that Cable is actually the one they're looking for, but really it's his evil twin Strife. Wolverine isn't quite ready to kill him dead though, not knowing about Strife, but he does have a small amount of doubt that stays in his head. So he's like, I'm just gonna hold off, because even though I think it's you, we don't know for sure. You're making me doubt it. Then when Bishop attempts to finish the job, because he's like, no way, we just hunted this guy down, we fought him, that's it, Wolverine in turn shows up Bishop by slicing his gun to pieces so that he can't actually kill Cable with it, telling him to cool off before getting another gun off the rack and getting back to sorting out this whole mess with Cable's currently very suspicious appearance and self. Even though, like we said, it's Strife, but we didn't know that yet. Or well, Wolverine didn't know that yet, at least. Number 5. Jean Grey gets more help than she bargained for. Jean gets more help than she asked for from Wolverine in this issue of X-Men. In fact, she didn't even really ask for his help to begin with, but she did complain about her ability to move freely in her outfit and her struggle to kind of like tear it so that she could move a little bit more freely. Which obviously was a classic mistake, because Logan is always more than happy to help Jeannie gain more mobility by maybe, parting with pieces of her garment. Hey, he's just trying to help her out. This all goes down in the very first X-Men Christmas special that we ever got. In this story, the X-Men are kidnapped, and it's during their daring escape that Jean complains of her inability to move freely. She's trying to tear her dress. So Wolverine, being the gentleman he is, sees her struggling and decides to help her tear away the bottom half of her gown, freeing up her movement, but at the expense of both irritating and seemingly confusing Jean, who actually responds with, "Hey, not so blasted short. Thank you very much. I think." I just love that whole response. She's like, I'm mad, but what even happened? Number 4, Cyclops is shamed. When Emma and Scott started seeing one another, Wolverine was pretty quick to embarrass them and shame them in front of the rest of the team. Mainly, he focused his ire on Scott, who he saw as betraying Jean's memory. And he wasn't alone either. By the way, at this point, Jean had recently died and Scott and Emma were together, but yeah, people all felt pretty weird about it. A lot of the other X-Men felt similarly, and they began to actually treat Scott differently because of his and Emma's relationship. This was because the two had started seeing one another psychically while Scott was still with Jean, but he and Marvel Girl, as she was formerly known, were having marital problems at the time. He had a psychic affair with Emma, and then after Jean died, immediately started just being in this very public relationship with her. Wolverine even went so far as to fight Scott physically over this blossoming relationship with Emma. Don't worry though, Jean's ghost would arrive to give Scott the green light so we could all feel better about the whole thing. Jean's ghost always coming back to be like, look, everyone just be cool. I'm Jean's ghost, I am like a god. Number 3, Shatterstar gets shattered. That's right, Wolverine pretty much completely embarrassed and obliterated Shatterstar in the Executioner's Song story. While Shatterstar did seem to miraculously survive here, Wolverine gave him a fistful of claws, not only embarrassing Shatterstar but also leaving Richter pretty distraught amidst the loss of his most dearest friend. Even back in the 90s, the feelings were pretty strong between Richter and Shatterstar, as is evident here and in many of the comics. This all went down in an epic fight between various X-teams, including a split-up X-Men roster into 2 separate teams, Blue and Gold, and X-Factor besides. Wolverine is quick to jump into action, and Shatterstar doesn't even get to show off his own impressive fighting skills much before Wolverine turns him into a shish kebab. For someone who is known for being a proud warrior, this whole display, I imagine, would be pretty disappointing for Shatterstar. While he didn't physically die from his injury here, he may have died of embarrassment. Number 2, Spider-Man gets hit where it hurts. In the heart. You can tell that this was a moment that really was upsetting to Peter Parker's Spider-Man because of how he reacts to it. At one point when both Wolverine and Spider-Man are staying in Avengers Tower, Pete and MJ, who is also there with Peter, have a kind of a relationship scandal. A news story is basically being spread around that MJ, who is still married to Peter at the time, is having an affair with Tony Stark. While Peter is distraught about this, Wolverine takes the opportunity to make a joke at MJ's expense and at the expense of her and Peter's relationship. He says, and I quote, "Sweet Cheeks messed up big time. It's not your fault she screwed up. I mean, if she had brains to go with all that beauty, she wouldn't be with you in the first place, right?" Ouch! Peter of course reacts by pushing Wolverine so hard that he goes flying through and out of a ceiling to floor window in the high-rise that was supposed to be made of unbreakable glass. So you can tell that one probably cut real deep for Peter. Whew. Number 1, the X-Force are defeated. The defeat of Shatterstar was just the beginning for the X-Force, unfortunately, in Executioner's Song. Shortly thereafter, they would also be tracked down by Wolverine and taken out primarily by him and Psylocke, forced to surrender to the Blue X-Men and X-Factor teams. And they were backed into a corner fairly easily, I gotta say, with Wolverine choosing to hunt them down and citing it as one of the things he is best known for, which obviously here he proves he is best known for it. He's pretty good at hunting people down. Although I imagine X-Force, like the other teams, also felt pretty conflicted about this whole fight against their friends, so this combined with Wolverine's ruthlessness probably helped to convince them in surrendering. Still, pretty embarrassing that basically Wolverine and Psylocke show up and they're like, hey, we're just gonna do this, and then everyone comes in at the end to be like, yeah, we're here too. Number 10, General Koi and Prince Buran get spooked. Wrapping up the events involving Terra Verde's civil unrest and the face-off with Spore in issue number 23 of the original Wolverine series, Wolverine decided upon his return to Madripoor that it was time to give General Koi and Prince Buran a taste of their own medicine. While Prince Buran was a sometimes ally of Wolverine's, for this story he was more playing the role of sometimes villain or antagonist that he's also known for in the series. As such, in the middle of the night, Wolverine pays a visit to both men and kidnaps them. They awaken blindfolded in the sewers, where Wolverine explains the extent of what can happen if the vial of the drug that Koi chose to keep were unleashed on someone, how it would basically make them go insane. It could also potentially unleash a darker evil who was only just defeated, Spore. Really not cool for you to keep that vial, Coy. Coy and Duran fear that Wolverine has administered the drug to them, terrified. They discover, however, that this is not the case, and instead that the only threat in these sewers is an equally deadly and very angry Wolverine. Horrified, they run in fear and escape from the sewers, only to be laughed at by the people of Madripoor as they surface, covered in sewage. Hopefully they learn their lesson. Knowing General Coy though, probably not, because then he does a lot of other stuff. Number 9. Unintentionally embarrassed Sabretooth. Sure, Wolverine is all for putting Victor in his place. Once he met the guy and knew how bad he was, that is. But before that, the Creeds were just a family that Wolverine kinda got tied up in. Logan ended up captured and in a circus being used as an attraction. Something about the X-Men and circuses, I tell you, happens a lot. This was really a low point in Wolverine's life as he was suffering from severe depression after the death of Rose, and then following that, the death of his wolf pack by Nathaniel Essex Bear, which was really upsetting because he'd taken a lot of solace in his pack. In the end, it was Clara Creed who managed to reach out to Logan, saving him both physically and emotionally. The two fell in love with one another quickly, but it didn't end well for either of them. Saul Creed, Clara's little brother, sold them out. Once this was revealed, Logan felt the only way to protect Clara was to get rid of Saul, permanently. Clara was ready to cut Saul out of her life, but didn't want to see him killed. Because Logan killed Saul, she rejected him. And because Logan killed Saul, Victor interpreted it as a slight, embarrassed that Logan had been the one to kill Saul, as Saul was Victor's to torment. Victor would visit Saul each year on his birthday to beat him up. So yeah, hence why Sabretooth visits Wolverine each year now instead, because he was like, how dare you do this to me? This is unacceptable. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more times that Wolverine kind of embarrassed his villains intentionally and unintentionally, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Blew up Dracula. If you've been surprised by Dracula appearing as a Wolverine villain in his current 2020 series, don't be. These two actually have a lot of history, and the mutants themselves have also tangled with vampires in general in the past. Old Man Logan even faced Dracula before, when mutants were disappearing and he was on the trail of tracking down his good pal and one of his sidekicks back in the day, Jubilee. This time around, however, Dracula seems to be interested in harnessing Wolverine's blood for its healing properties, and using the blood to help all vampires walk in the daylight without danger of going up in flames and perishing. Wolverine, however, literally blew up Dracula's well-laid plans when he took part in a plan to turn his body into a bomb. Well, more a devoid of consciousness clone body. This body was then offered to Dracula by his less than faithful servant Omega Red, which means instead of walking in the daylight, much of Drax's following instead went up in smoke, as Wolverine's clone's blood was altered to be like liquid sunshine to the vamps, thick with photonic cells, and so he became a dirty bomb. Or well, his clone became a dirty bomb. Number 7. Avon Calling. Not necessarily a great super villain of Wolverine's per se, but in issue number 30 of the original Wolverine series, Wolverine managed to embarrass a whole team of Madripoorian militia and palace guards when he was dealing with the masterminds behind the Lazarus Project. As he and his allies aimed to infiltrate the palace and confront General Coy, Broker, not to be confused with the Power Broker, and Dr. Page, Wolverine walks right up to the guard, and when he asks who goes there, answers, Avon Calling. Wolverine can be nonchalant and make jokes here because he's got Karma on his team. Rather than respond with an attack, Karma basically takes hold of the guard's mind and then has him take them into the palace under the guise of his prisoners. Of course, this ruse doesn't last for too long, but it does last long enough to get them into the palace at least, and to basically where they need to go. Number 6. Ruined Merchant's Auction. When Wolverine donned his patch disguise to return once more to Madripoor, it was quickly revealed to him that everyone kinda already knew who he was. And while he had come to save a former teammate from being auctioned off as a weapon, he himself ended up on the auctioning block. But although the merchant saw his presence as an opportunity, in the end he realized his mistake, as Wolverine didn't just get away with Maverick as intended, but pretty much ruined his whole auction and Merchant's whole catalog besides. You can check out how badly Wolverine ruined this party by checking out issues number 9 and 10 of the 2020 Wolverine series. Number 5. Resisted the change. Wolverine's healing factor doesn't just protect him from severe injuries, it also protects him against supernatural related monster rules such as how they dictate transformations. And if he does end up getting affected by said rules, the change is typically only temporary for him. Eventually his healing factor will basically cure him. Case in point, when Old Man Logan faced off with Dracula during his hunt for Jubilee. Dracula managed to attack Wolverine and even bite him in this second volume of Old Man Logan, but the joke was on Drac. Wolverine's healing factor protected him him from giving into vampirism, and we learned that he was immune to said bite and its effects. Sorry, Dracula. In the end, Wolverine came out on top, managing to later on decapitate Dracula. Obviously, he came back, but for the Prince of Darkness, King of Lies, Lord of the Undead, this was a pretty embarrassing defeat. Especially as he bit him and then he was like, yes, this didn't work, but that's fine. I'm sure it's taking all of your healing factor to fight off the vampirism. I don't know if it was actually taking all of his healing factor. He did look a little rough, but I feel like Wolverine was like, yeah, sure, bub, all of my healing factor. Number 4, bad karaoke for Maverick and Merchant. Later on in the current Wolverine series, Maverick would take a job from Merchant, deciding in the end to work with him despite Merchant attempting to auction him off previously, and thereby putting Maverick in the crosshairs of Wolverine. With the two at odds fighting over information stored on a Krakoan bug, Wolverine in the end decided to let Maverick think he stole that bug back from him and his friend CIA agent Jeff Bannister, only for Maverick to learn later while handing it over to Merchant that the bug was actually wiped clean and the information on it replaced with tons of Johnny Cash karaoke, likely taken from performances at the Green Lagoon's karaoke night. Oh boy. Number 3, Omega Red versus the Wolverines. You mess with the Wolverine, you get a bunch of them that you have to deal with. You get all the Wolverines. As was evident when Omega Red came to Krakoa seeking to claim what his mutant given right was, to take refuge on the new mutant island nation. And, you know, not be condemned or anything, even though he did bad stuff in the past. However, not everyone was able to forgive and forget when it came to his past, namely Wolverine. Still suspicious of Omega Red, once it seemed as though he'd seen him appear outside of Krakoa and kind of trap him in ice, Wolverine was ready to confront him, already having an uneasy feeling about his former nemesis since pretty much day one. However, when Wolverine explained what had happened to him, to his family, they weren't ready to let him go in alone. He was joined by Daken and Gabby, who both showed Omega Red how easy it was to sneak up on him and get him in a trap. In the end, the discussion had to be tabled, but it was pretty fun to see the look on his face when the Wolverine family came together to attack him. If you were wondering where Laura was, by the way, she'd likely still be in the vault at this time, as per her adventures in the 2019 X-Men series, which is why she wasn't there. Otherwise, I'm sure Laura would also be there. Number 2, found the perfect match for Solemn. After it was revealed that Solemn had taken Logan's Muramasa blade and ended up giving one such blade to the Iraqi pirate, Severe, during Solemn's escape from him, Wolverine tracked Solemn down. He confronted Solemn and was convinced to take on Sever with him together. Later, Solemn bailed on this confrontation in typical Solemn fashion, it seems. However, Wolverine had a few tricks up his sleeve. Realizing that he and Solemn were fairly even matched, he decided to call in some reinforcements. Wolverine went to the White Queen, Emma Frost, and had her join him in their confrontation of Solemn, which she was happy to do as she had her own score to settle with him. They pursued Solemn to the sliver of remaining Araco Island on Earth where he was hiding out. And let's just say that while Wolverine and Solemn could likely fight against one another all day to only really reach a stalemate, Emma was out of Solemn's league. She interrogated him, much to his dismay and embarrassment, because Emma of course can easily access almost anyone's hidden dirty secrets and desires, no matter how dirty and secret and hidden they are. So now she knows everything about Solemn, whether she wanted to or not. Number 1, Ultimate Family Jewels. Oh boy. Of course, a lot of embarrassing moments would come from the Ultimate Universe, wouldn't they? This one hails from issue number 12 of the Ultimate X-Men series. Here, Ultimate Wolverine and Ultimate Sabretooth face off, only for Wolverine to completely embarrass Victor in this fight. As Sabretooth holds Wolverine beneath the water, making him suffocate and killing his brain cells, Wolverine counterattacks by going for his, family jewels, as he calls them. His retort to Sabretooth mocking how he'll never be considered a brainiac now turns to tears and pain as Wolverine responds that at least he's smart enough to cover his family jewels in a fight before he tackles Sabretooth off a cliff. Wow, what a way to finish a fight. Number 10, killed his lover's brother. I mean, granted, his lover Clara Creed's brother Saul did set him up to be recaptured by Mr. Sinister. And yes, I did say Creed. This was established in the comic Origins number 2. It was here that we learned that Clara, Victor Creed's sister, was once the lover of Wolverine. Saul became jealous of Wolverine's close relationship with his sister, and so he decided to sell him out to Sinister. Well, him and her. Clara was seemingly killed by Essex, but recovered due to her healing factor, and Wolverine later realized the truth, that Saul was the one who had sold them out. In a fit of rage, he drowned Saul Creed in a vat of liquid in Sinister's lair. The same liquid that Essex planned to use on Logan to wipe his mind clean. Despite the fact that Saul was not really a great person, Wolverine still did not need to kill him here, and continued to drown him even as Clara begged Logan to stop hurting her brother. Wolverine killing Saul was also what would be explained as the reason why Sabretooth visits him every year on his birthday to torment him and fight him. That was what Victor used to do apparently to his little brother Saul every year. Because Victor could no longer punish Saul, he instead decided to punish the man who took his little brother away from him. It's like a weird, like, I loved my brother because I loved beating him up. Number 9. Didn't lift a finger to save a kid. Later on, when a very young prisoner of war was about to be shot upon his release by the rebel faction that Wolverine was working with, Logan did not do anything to stop it. Granted, he did figure that Eric, who had agreed to take care of that prisoner, Jamie, would do the right thing. Jamie was seemingly freed by his captors, but this was all to give him one last moment of joy before they took his life. They were like, yeah, you can go free, and then they're like, now we'll shoot him. Fortunately, while Eric took on the burden of killing Jamie, he actually did this so that he would be sure that the boy would truly go free, pretending to have missed the shot, allowing young Jamie to escape. Eric, by the way, is also the well-known author George Orwell, which is his pen name. This is a gloriously weird story that this point comes from, as evident by the fact that, yeah, George Orwell is in the story. This act, or lack thereof, comes to us from issue 36 of the 1988 Wolverine series. And friends, before I move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about Wolverine, I love talking about Wolverine, so be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. More mutant lists. Blah! Number 8. Killed a newly powered mutant. The newly powered mutant in question doesn't even have a name and is a high school kid. This of course all went down in the Ultimate Universe, which is a much harsher and gritty world by comparison to the Earth of 616. Still, Wolverine kills the kid who had just learned he is a mutant because it had been deemed that that kid is too dangerous. His powers allow him to basically vaporize people in his vicinity, and you get to see it happen in this issue as well, and I will say it's pretty brutal. It's like he like burns people sort of from the inside out is what it looks like. Without meaning to, this kid vaporized all the people in his hometown, including his own family and his girlfriend. Rather than try to help this poor kid, it's decided the best thing for all of mutant kind, though maybe not this youngster himself, is for him to die. Wolverine is sent on a mission to deal with this new mutant. He talks to the kid and does his best to explain sort of what's going on and what's gonna happen. He isn't a cold-hearted killer after all, but he also still goes through with the mission without even seeming to question if it's the right thing to do. I mean, come on, Wolverine. It's just a kid. The two mutants go up to a cave in the evening and Wolverine gives him a beer and explains the whole situation, and in the morning, only Wolverine leaves the cave, implying the despicable deed has been done. Also, this kid never even got a name. Number 7. Kidnapped a nun. Now granted, Wolverine did this to actually try and help a recurring rival of his from back in Madripoor, Roughhouse. Roughhouse, you see, had been taken by the evil cyborg Geist, who had been around since World War II and had a history of working for villainous world leaders, including the Fuhrer. Geist had taken Roughhouse to use him for experimentation, as he was trying to use a very intense type of cocaine to turn Roughhouse into a hero for the nation of Terra Verde, and more specifically its militaristic and villainous ruler at the time, President Caradid. However, the cocaine had some alarming side effects, and that's why Wolverine kidnapped the nun. She was a healer known as Sister Salvation, who was actually once the wife of the president before seeing the sins of her lifestyle and her husband and renouncing her marriage and becoming a nun as a result. Sister Salvation was the only one who could calm Roughhouse's unbridled rage and heal his disfigurement, symptoms of the cocaine. It's actually even implied that Sister Salvation may have been a mutant this whole time. But anyways, so even though she had done nothing wrong, Wolverine took her with them by force, so that Sister Salvation could help keep Roughhouse in check. This all went down in issues 20 to 21 of the 1988 series of Wolverine. Also, I love this entire story, so you should go read it. It's good. Number 6. Killed Hank Pym. Of course, he had a pretty good reason to do so, and this wasn't actually main continuity Hank Pym. This was a Hank Pym from a time when Wolverine had time traveled back to in order to prevent the creation of Ultron to begin with, killing Hank of Earth 26111 before he could bring Ultron into existence. Time travel. Unfortunately, although he had good intentions here, Wolverine actually made everything even worse by doing this, and while the disaster that was Ultron was avoided, worse ones quickly popped up in his place. Enter Morgan Le Fay's magics versus Tony Stark's science. This all went down in the Age of Ultron series, with Wolverine killing Hank in issue number 6, with the aftermath spilling out into the following issues. Also, this is just another reason to just be like, hey, don't do time travel. It usually doesn't work out. Just don't do it. If you're like, maybe I'll time travel to fix everything. No, I've read too many comics about this, I've seen too many movies, it's gonna be a bad idea. Overall. Except for maybe Back to the Future, although it goes wrong and then it usually goes right by the end. Comedies. Number 5. Killed his childhood sweetheart. Now granted, Wolverine didn't mean to kill Rose, it just kinda happened. But he still did it. Rose was Logan's childhood friend and sweetheart back when he was known as James Howlett. When James left his family home, which was tragically torn asunder, Rose went with him. Eventually, she was courted by a man who wanted to marry her, and she agreed, breaking young Wolvie's heart. Ouch. In the end, however, Logan was drawn back into a fight with his former friend / rival growing up, Dog. Dog had returned to kill Logan and seemingly also do harm to Rose, or take her with him, or some other terrible thing. The two got into a fight, and it came to the point where Logan was about to kill Dog. Not wanting Logan to be a murderer, Rose urged him to stop, heading towards him, and in the midst of a panicked crowd, tripping and stumbling as she rushed to his side and becoming impaled on his bone claws. How tragic. Even Logan was aware of how terrible this was. What's worse is it seemed like Rose the whole time actually had loved him. I mean, they were kind of pretending to be cousins at this point, so it was kind of a thing where they were like, maybe we both have feelings but we can't be together. Rose died and Logan lost his mind, turning feral under the weight of what he had done. This all went down in backstory series Wolverine: The Origin, with Rose's death happening in issue number 6. Number 4. Put moves on MJ. This one went down in the Ultimate Universe, but although it wasn't 616 Wolverine who was responsible, it was still a Wolverine. Just the Wolverine of Earth 1610 instead. In the Ultimate Universe, at one point, Wolverine and Spider-Man swap bodies. This all happens because, well, Jean is mad at Logan, which is maybe one of the most despicable things that Jean has done, making Wolverine swap bodies with someone that he hates, but I guess we'll save that for our Jean Grey version of this list. While their bodies are swapped, it turns out Wolverine got some alone time with Mary Jane while in Peter's body. We later learn, once the two heroes have swapped back, that Logan in Peter's body attempted to put the moves on MJ and even tried to sleep with the young lady, which is pretty despicable for like a long list of reasons. And I don't think I have to go into them because I think you know what they are. Number 3. Trying to shame the Punisher, which admittedly doesn't sound that despicable. Like on paper, trying to shame someone doesn't sound that bad, until you understand the whole context in which Logan tried to shame Frank here. This really comes down to a sort of comic book writer feud, wherein Frank Thierry, longtime writer on the Wolverine series, decided to get back at Garth Ennis for his brutal rendition of the fight that happened between Wolverine and the Punisher in his own Punisher run. Ennis's fight happened in Punisher issue 17 back in the 2001 series. That fight really only started because Punisher made fun of Wolverine's height. Their team up there also started with them taking on a group of people with dwarfism, and then of course ends with Wolverine getting steamrolled by Frank, and I mean literally steamrolled with a steamroller. To get revenge though, Frank Thierry sank pretty low. At the end of his fight with the two heroes in issue 186 of Wolverine, he has Wolverine discover Punisher's bodybuilding mags, and basically makes fun of him for having them and trying to shame the Punisher because he believes that he's gay. That's pretty awful. Now granted, Wolverine in the present day is a proud parent of Akihiro, aka Daken, his openly bisexual son, so obviously I don't think this writing reflects the modern day character, but like, yeesh, is a pretty bad. It was a weird time, friends. Number 2. Drowned his own son in a puddle. Speaking of Akihiro, I mean exactly what I just said is really what happened here. Granted, like so many awful things that Wolverine has done on this list, this one also wasn't directly his fault. He and his son Daken, aka Akihiro, were manipulated by Sabretooth, which is what led to this moment. The most tragic element of this whole thing is that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and sadly just spent time reflecting on what his life could have been like with Daken if he had actually been able to grow up with his father around. They could have had a beautiful relationship instead of hating and wanting to kill one another. Wolverine thinks on this, imagining what their lives could have been like, all while drowning Daken in a puddle. If you want to see this heartbreaking horror show of this son versus dad battle, check out issue 34 of the first volume of Uncanny X-Force, which started in 2010. Also, I believe that's Rick Remender and Phil Noto, and you know I love Phil Noto, and also Remender's done some pretty cool stuff, so it's a good one, but a tragic one. Number 1. Forgot about his kids, then killed them. Never mind. Wolverine just killing Akihiro, who admittedly in the past has also been pretty evil, so as awful as that was, there was still kind of an element to that where it almost felt fair. It was still sad, but you were like, I mean, he's kind of a bad guy. But Wolverine's fights against his children is not a saga that ends there. In fact, there was another time in the comics where Daken actually pitted his dad against his fellow half-siblings, all children of Wolverines that he either never knew about or had forgotten as a side effect of his healing powers and his super long lifespan. This team team was brought together by Daken, and he called them the Mongrels. Or well, brought together by Daken, and the Red Right Hand at least called them the Mongrels. They came together to take on their father, with Daken training them for the fight. In the end, however, Wolverine defeated them, killing them all. Now this of course is a win-win scenario for Daken though, because either they killed Wolverine, his own father and enemy, or they ended up killed, which meant that Daken would also have a part in hurting his dad just by revealing the truth of the team members and how they were all his kids. Really though, the greater organization behind this whole plot was the Red Right Hand, who only wanted Wolverine to suffer as they had. They were united by the fact that they'd all lost family members to Logan, who had killed them at one point or another in his very long life, which is why they pit him against his own unknown children before taking their own lives. They were like, we don't even want you to die, we just want you to hurt people that you once loved or could have loved. You know how it is. And Wolverine doesn't even know, because he's like, I don't even know who these people are. And then later finds out and is like, oh gosh, oh boy, my life is terrible.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Deadpool. The cancelled Deadpool 3 movie would have been pretty amazing over at Fox. We would have seen Logan and Wade on a road trip from hell. It would have been much better than the last time we saw them on screen together. Yeah. But in the comics, Deadpool and Logan have, of course, bumped heads, like in Cable and Deadpool issue 44, for example. The two are fighting at a Hydra base, and Wolverine straight up impales Wade to the wall. It's a fun comic. Wade spends the first half with his head off, just getting kicked around like a soccer ball. It's all fun and games. But finally, Logan keeps Wade still once he shoves his claws through him and into the wall. That ought to get your attention sometimes. Number 9. The Hulk. Going back to volume 1 of the Incredible Hulk issue 340 titled Vicious Circle, we find the Hulk and Rick Jones out in a blizzard. They're trying to drive, but it seems like they're only going in circles. Meanwhile, the Hulk is going nuts. He needed to get out of there. Like when you have to stretch your legs on a road trip, I get it, right? So he blasts the roof right off, and the X-Men just happen to be in the neighborhood flying by. The Hulk almost hits them mid-air after he jumps off. I would say good thing he didn't hit them, but he continued flying by and then hit a Pan Am passenger plane, so it's like, maybe he should have hit them then. So the X-Men were busy handling that, obviously, while on the ground, the Hulk landed and caused more damage. Wolverine tracked the beast down, and believe it or not, the Hulk almost snuck up on him. He couldn't catch the Hulk's scent, so it was really dangerously close. Wolverine popped his claws, turned, and then sliced the Hulk's arm, and they both looked at each other. And Wolverine, he walked away at this point. He retracted his claws. He's like, hey, remember who you are, Logan? Remember what you're doing. You're the bigger man here. And he's like, breathes, then he walks away, and then the Hulk jumps out at him and then starts it all over again. He thunderclaps Wolverine's ears to smithereens. His enhanced senses, this for sure, got the ball rolling, got him pretty upset. After this, naturally, there's mayhem. They take turns beating the crap out of each other until the fight was eventually at an end because it was broken up. But Wolverine for sure won this round. He tried walking away initially. He's the victim here, folks, don't forget that. Number 8, Spider-Man. In Spider-Man vs. Wolverine, released in 1987, we see Peter slinging across the city. He's trying to snap some pics for the Bugle. He's looking for his light, trying to get that angle right, but all of a sudden, trouble calls. He hears a young woman scream, so he zips down, and he finds the owners of a grocery store dead on the spot. So he ends up following that lead, and it brings him right into Logan's path. Now, Logan has already been doing his own plan at this point, and then in comes this kid wearing pajamas, shooting webs at people. So the two heroes now have no choice but to go loud and proud. They both fight off criminals together, and it's a fun time, but once they realize they're too late, Charlemagne had already gotten there, there's lots of bodies, so Logan naturally blames Spider-Man for ruining the whole thing. He's like, if it wasn't for you, this would not have happened in the first place. Pretty deep words. Spider-Man fires back though, he's not taking any of this. The two walk separate ways, but it's not over yet. Wolverine's meditating, he's feeling bad. Spider-Man's in bed, tossing and turning. He tries to take out Charlie himself, but Peter stops him. Well, he tries to. They fight in a graveyard for a few pages, but when Peter turns around to hit Wolverine one last time, he accidentally hits Charlie instead. I'm counting this as a loss because Peter wanted to fight. He engaged and he swung without looking. And now he can't get that image out of his head, and neither can we. Number 7, the X-Men. Okay, when I say the X-Men, I mean like all of them. Big yikes. Old Man Logan, one of the best storylines of all time, also one of the darkest. In a grim future where supervillains are taking over the planet, Mysterio pulls out perhaps one of his best tricks, if I do say so myself. If this happened in the MCU, kids would throw up gummy worms. They would be mortified. Mysterio tricks Logan into fighting the X-Men. He makes Logan believe that they're all supervillains, so Logan kills them all. He feels horrible, obviously, so he runs off into the woods and he tries to take himself out. That's how bad he felt, but he vowed to never pull the claws out again after that didn't work. Even Santa Claus 2, starring Tim Allen, he's like, I can't do it. I made a vow, I can't do it. Number 6, Wolverine. Hey, question YouTube, if you fought yourself, who would win? In Logan, we got to witness Wolverine fight another Wolverine, but in the Age of Ultron comic, it was actually much darker, much more brain scratching at least. In Age of Ultron, the comic, we get to see this dark future where the Avengers are getting whooped. Ultron is using Vision as a conduit from the future, like the world's most painful game of broken telephone. The Avengers don't really see a way to get to Ultron and stop him, so they send Sue Storm and Logan back in time to find a solution. Now Logan wants to just straight up kill Hank Pym, just to make sure Ultron is never created. But in doing so, this opens up a dark alternate future, so when they go back, this new timeline that they've now created made the Kree-Skrull War move to Earth. So they run into the defenders of that timeline and also Logan of that timeline. Wolverine versus Wolverine, what a time. The time-traveling Wolverine beat alternate Wolverine, so everybody wins. Or loses. I'm not sure in this case. My head hurts, to be honest. Let's move on. Number 5, Teen Mutant. He doesn't have a name, so we'll just refer to him as Mr. Teen Mutant Boy, whatever you want to call him. He doesn't have a name because he's only around for one issue, spoiler alert, despite having an insane power. Let's talk about it. Ultimate X-Men issue 41. Now at first glance, he looks like a regular kid. He's got posters on his wall, one of which is Wolverine with the caption, "Be different," which is pretty amazing given how his day is about to go down. He wakes up, he's ready for school, he's looking for breakfast because he doesn't know how to make food. Apparently his mom is like the only one that can make him breakfast. So his mom's nowhere to be seen, so he doesn't eat. Only a pile of her clothes remain on the ground, and he's like, okay, so he goes to school. He doesn't call the police like a psychopath. If you ever see this, definitely call for help, absolutely. He continues on, he goes to school, but on the way there, he sees a collar on the ground on the sidewalk, but no animal. Again, more articles of clothing just strewn about. But then finally, he sees people. Okay, he's not going crazy. This is a good sign. We have real, like live people. Lovely. But I bet he wished that that wasn't the case. So he has this fantastic ability where if you're just near this guy, you don't survive to talk about it. He hears it from the guy in the poster himself, the Be Different guy, Wolverine. He finds him ducking out in a cave and breaks the news to him. What happened was when he hit puberty, he developed a specific mutation that radiates a series of toxins and acid-like poisons, and it basically wipes out any organic tissue. It turns it into vapor. So the amount of people that he ended up accidentally killing that day was in the 260s number, yeah. So he doesn't last for long because, well, Wolverine came out of that cave all alone. You do the math. Imagine your idol coming into a cave to kill you. It's not bad. I don't know. It could be worse. If Hugh Jackman killed me, I'd be like, okay. That's not bad. Number 4, Lobo. We've talked about comic crossovers quite a bit here on Top 10 Nerd. They're a blast, I mean, for the most part. DC vs. Marvel showed us some pretty entertaining battles. I mean, we got to see Captain America vs. Batman, Spider-Man vs. Superboy, and of course, Lobo vs. Wolverine. The third issue out of the 4, we find Logan bad-mouthing Lobo's favorite bar. Logan is talking smack and Lobo interrupts him with a nice chain to the chest. That ought to hurt. Wolverine ends up walking out of the bar smoking a cigar. Also, he's alive. How did this happen? We're not sure how this one ended up going down as most of this fight happened behind the bar, but to kill an immortal man, good on you, James. Number 3, Jean Grey. This next one played out in live action in everybody's favorite X-Men movie, X-Men The Last Stand. So good. It's not. Showed us Wolverine taking out Jean Grey in a mercy type way in order to stop the Dark Phoenix from causing mayhem. Now this of course went down in the comics as well, and it was much better on page than on screen. You can find it in New X-Men issue 148. Wolverine is telling Jean that Scott still loves her, although he's just maybe a bit confused at this moment. Jean is weak. She's saying she can't breathe, that she has this terrible feeling that she feels scared and weird, that there's voices inside of her head. She knows she's dying. It's a really sad part in the comics. And Wolverine can't take the pain on himself, but he can take the pain away for now. Hugh Jackman is a wonderful actor, don't get me wrong, so is Famke Janssen, but the comic is way harder than the movie. This whole scene here gets my throat that little like, get a little tight throat feeling. So let's move on from really sad to really gross, shall we? Let's finish off like that. Number 2, the Hulk. Mark Millar's Old Man Logan. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Let's talk about it some more, it's good. It begins in volume 3 of Wolverine on issue 66 to be specific, and this is a future where supervillains have won. They did it! Good job, supervillains, nice. Hulk and She-Hulk had kids, the Hulklings, who, not nice, we don't want to talk about that. They would beat the crap out of you if you didn't pay rent, basically. Everybody had their own territory at this point, so Logan had to pay up. So Hulk gang ended up taking out Logan's family because they were bored. They're also a little messed up in the head if you didn't already put that together. So Logan heads back and sees the Hulk, and he's like, you know what, no more games, no more talking, I'm here to get this done. Logan gets Banner right through the old chest plate, but we all know what happens next. He hulks out, and then he eats Logan. If you can't beat him, you gotta swallow him. That's the rule, right? Now you think this would be the end of it, but that's not what this list is. Now is it? No, you already know it's about to change. That's when Logan pops out from inside Banner, the old C-section from hell. So basically, if you eat Wolverine, just know that it's coming out one of any way he wants, essentially. And finally, coming in at number 1, everybody. What if Wolverine killed everybody? The entire Marvel Universe. Could he do it? Would he do it? Yes and yes. Written by Jimmy Robinson, released in 2006, this What If is based on Mark Millar's Enemy of the State series, taking place in Wolverine Volume 3 from issues 20 to 25. Now in that story, Wolverine is used to try and hunt down the Avengers, the X-Men, just everybody. The Hand and the Hydra were using him as a weapon. Baron von Strucker used him to steal documents from Reed Richards. It was a whole plan, right? It was a whole thing. But S.H.I.E.L.D. was able to capture him and heal him. In this What If, we see a world where Wolverine kept working for Hydra and the Hand. In this alternate timeline, everybody gets wiped out. Nick Fury is telling Cap and the others, I mean, sure, Hydra and the Hand is a concern, but like, we need to stop Wolverine first, like ASAP. That should be the first thing on our list right now. Thing is, Wolverine kills Spider-Man. He kills Iron Fist, he takes off Captain America's arm and leg, because whenever Wolverine is in trouble, Hydra just teleports him away. You can't really hit him. Susan Storm tried to make this force field trap that kept Logan in the same spot, with Magneto helping out as well, but while they were planning that, Wolverine snuck in and attacked them all through the floors, so everybody gets messed up there as well. Magneto and Sue Storm, gone and gone. Captain America gets claws in the head, also gone. So Kitty Pryde phases her hand into Logan's head and kills him that way. You gotta end the list on a horrible note, you know, because why not?